Hello everybody, welcome to another Versus Video Deck Tech. CVM here alongside
BBD.
The old Braun-Duin. And I am playing the other artifact deck in Legacy, this time with much fewer cards that are legal in Modern.
Yep, CVM with the Boogeyman again.
Metalworker. We're going to be playing Metalworker. Now I have a little bit of a history with this deck. I took a little over a year off, and my first tournament back was the Invitational in Atlanta, and I placed in the top 16 using the Metalworker deck. And it was very fun, and I'm excited to run it back here again. So the idea of this deck is to utilize Metalworker to generate a bunch of mana and then just put everything into play. So we have a couple different moving pieces that go alongside with Metalworker. Kuldoth the Forge Master we can get out very quickly, and then it allows us to just put any artifact from our library into play. Then we have a couple exciting ones that we can get, be it Blightsteel Colossus to kill our opponent. If we have Lightning Greaves, we can just actually kill them right away.
Yep.
Platinum Empyrean to make it so our opponent can't kill us. You can also go get Spine of Ishah to remove a troublesome permanent. Or if we have a Metalworker in play, we can go get Staff of Domination, and you can basically go infinite with just a few artifacts in your hand and draw your whole deck and kill your opponent, basically. We also have 3 Wurmcoil Engines. So, there's a lot of Swords to Plowshares in Legacy, but not every deck has them, and there are a lot of decks that just actually can't beat a 6/6 lifelinking creature.
And there's also the ability of Goblin Welder, probably the best card in the deck.
Yeah.
To prevent Swords to Plowshares from destroying Wurmcoil Engine.
So Goblin Welder allows you to exchange an artifact in play with an artifact in your graveyard. Now, it doesn't have to be mine. I can actually use it against Brian's artifacts, which I imagine will be pretty relevant in our match. But it does allow us to do some really neat things with Wurmcoil Engine, generating tokens. It also lets us do some cool things with Grim Monolith and Voltaic Key if we're needing to slide some artifacts in and out to generate some additional mana. Same thing with things like Chalice of the Void. If we just need to get an artifact in our graveyard into play, we can just play a Chalice on 0 and then weld it out. But Welder is actually very good in this deck because Force of Will is a huge force in Legacy, and we have Cavern of Souls, which will allow us to cast our Goblin Welders. They can't be forced, and then from then on, any artifact that we cast is going to see play eventually, whether or not it comes into play from our graveyard or from the stack.
Yeah, so you cast your, I don't know, Spine of Ishah, and your opponent's like Force of Will, and you're like, all right, sacrifice my Great Furnace to Goblin Welder, put Spine back into play. So.
Exactly. Now, Chalice of the Void is one of the other big parts of this deck, as it's not so much now as the format has changed a little bit from when I played this deck last year in Atlanta, but it still heavily revolves around a bunch of powerful 1-mana spells, and being able to Chalice for 1 with either City of Traders or Ancient Tomb is very, very good at shutting off a lot of cards and a lot of decks. In fact, if you're playing against Rug Delver on the play and you Chalice for 1 and they don't have a Force of Will, it's almost impossible for them to beat you.
Yeah, they have 4 Tarmogoyfs.
And that's it.
That's all they have left. So
Chalice is very good. And our goal is to Chalice for 1, but our Goblin Welder costs 1 mana. But if you have Cavern of Souls on Goblin and cast your Goblin Welder with a Chalice on 1 in play,
it cannot be countered.
Cannot be countered. So you actually get to put it into play. Yeah. I got to do that a couple times when I played this deck at the Invitational Atlanta, and all of my opponents' minds were blown every time I did it. It's pretty cute.
It is cute.
Then we also have Lodestone Golem to go along with the Chalice of the Void, just to play a sort of mana denial plan, and then a Crucible of Worlds to go along with our Wastelands. So there's a lot of different moving parts with this deck, and it all just kind of comes together as this big, explosive, powerful monster that is very draw dependent. So that is with the big drawback to decks like this, is you don't have a card like Brainstorm to find you what you need in the mid to late game. So you really have to have a huge push in the early game and just try and ride that out through the remainder of the game, because when your opponents have Brainstorm and you don't, you're going to be at a disadvantage in that situation.
Yeah, like when your opening hand is like 2 Caverns, a Great Furnace, a Mox Opal, a Platinum Empyrean, a Blightsteel, and a Spine of Ishah.
We're going to 6.
Yeah, you're probably not beating anything with that hand, so. Yeah.
So yeah, this deck is definitely draw dependent, as you'll find a lot of the decks like this, whether it's in Modern, with Affinity, in Legacy, Affinity or Metalworker. But the good thing is the cards are so powerful that you can afford to go to 5 or 6, and then just cast a Wurmcoil Engine on turn 2 and win with that.
Yep.
So it definitely has ways to pull you out of it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboard and see what options we have for a deck that really only has 1 color. All right, here we are for the sideboard for the Metalworker deck. And there's some interesting cards here. Start off with Trinisphere, just another one of our lock plans. It's very big in Vintage in the Workshop deck since you can cast it on turn 1. We're not really going to be casting it on turn 1 here, although we can because we have some Moxes in our deck. It's still going to be very good on like turn 2 or turn 3 against decks like Storm. Storm have a very difficult time beating this card. 2 Tormod's Crypts as ways to interact with the graveyard. We don't want to use Grafdigger's Cage because it stops us from using our Kuldotha Forge Master, but we do want something to interact with the graveyard, which is why Crypt is chosen here.
Cage also gets countered by the common Chalice on 1.
Correct. We do have 3 Phyrexian Revokers as ways to turn off troublesome permanents, 2 Ratchet Bombs as ways to kill troublesome permanents that we can't turn off with Phyrexian Revoker, a 4th Wormcoil Engine, a Duplicant, just as a removal spell. It's very good against the Show and Tell decks. A Thorn of Amethyst and a Sphere of Resistance is just additional lock pieces to tax our opponent's mana. And then a sweet card in Mindslaver that I'm actually really excited is in the sideboard here. I didn't play it in my list. I had a Karn in that spot instead. But Mindslaver does seem very good, very powerful, and I think it's going to be tough to actually lose if you get to Mindslaver your opponent in Legacy.
Yeah, and it's not... You don't have like the Academy Ruins lock, but you do have the Goblin
Welder.
Yeah, the Goblin Welder soft lock, where as long as you have artifacts in play, you can Mindslaver your opponent every single turn.
Yeah, which is actually a classic Vintage combo, Goblin Welder and Mindslaver. Although we don't have Mana Drain to power out an early Mindslaver, we do have Metalworker who can do the same thing. So that's the sideboard for the deck. We're definitely going to be casting some sweet spells this time. I'm pretty excited. It's a little bit different from how boring Standard has gotten over the last couple of months. And let's see which artifact deck can prevail in the Brown-Off.
Yeah. CVM's going to get browned.